There's a quiet kind of self-destruction that masquerades as kindness. It doesn't scream, it doesn't bleed, it doesn't get attention like anger or addiction or breakdowns. Instead, it smiles, it nods, it agrees, it helps, it gives until there's nothing left. And then, when there's no applause, no gratitude, no reciprocation, when the room is empty and the phone doesn't ring and the silence swells, something inside begins to rot. This is the curse of the people pleaser. The one who says yes when they mean no. The one who stays late, picks up the slack, remembers every birthday, bites their tongue, swallows their pride, and carries the weight of others so they don't have to feel the heaviness of being unwanted. On the surface, it looks like generosity, but underneath, it's often just unacknowledged fear. Fear of rejection, of conflict, of abandonment, a chronic ache for approval, stitched together with fake smiles and invisible resentments. Psychologically, the need to please others at the cost of oneself is rarely a personality trait. It's a survival strategy, one that often begins in childhood, in environments where love was conditional. Maybe you had a parent who only showed affection when you achieved something. Maybe you learned that being quiet and helpful made you less of a target. Maybe your emotions weren't safe to express, so you buried them under politeness. Whatever the case, you began to trade authenticity for acceptance. You learned that being needed was safer than being seen. This conditioning doesn't go away just because you grow up. It matures with you, shape-shifting into adult behavior that looks functional but feels hollow. You become the friend who always listens but never shares, the partner who overextends but never asks, the employee who over-delivers while slowly burning out. You may pride yourself on being dependable, but deep down, it's exhausting. Because no matter how much you give, it never feels like enough. And that's because the transaction is flawed. You're not giving freely, you're giving to be loved. This type of emotional labor is invisible to most people. They don't see the calculations behind every response. The way you scan the room for disapproval, the way you prepare 5 versions of the same message just to avoid offending someone, the way your body tenses at the thought of someone being upset with you. And because no one sees the toll it takes, you're rarely thanked for it. In fact, the more accommodating you are, the more people expect it. Kindness becomes your cage. It's no accident that chronic people-pleasing is closely tied to low self-worth. You begin to believe your value lies in what you can offer others, not who you are. You tolerate disrespect because you don't want to seem difficult. You let boundaries slide because you fear being alone. You say yes to things that make you miserable just to avoid the guilt of saying no. Over time, this disconnect from your own needs becomes so familiar that it feels like your identity. You forget who you were before you started trying to be everything to everyone. Emotionally, this creates a deep internal split. On one hand, you crave connection. On the other, you resent the way people take advantage of you. You may start to feel bitter, passive-aggressive, or even depressed, but rather than express it, you suppress it. Because expressing your true feelings might risk disapproval. You become trapped in a performance, and the role is exhausting. You smile through the pain. You show up when you're falling apart. You become so attuned to everyone else's emotions that you lose touch with your own. And then there's the shame. The quiet voice that whispers you're weak for not being able to say no. That if you were stronger, you'd assert yourself. But this only feeds the cycle, because now you are trying to please others while secretly hating yourself for it. That inner conflict eats away at your peace. You feel like a fraud, like you're constantly managing a version of yourself, rather than simply existing. Authenticity becomes a luxury you believe you can't afford. Psychologically, this split creates what some therapists call fawning, a trauma response where the nervous system reacts to threat by appeasing. Unlike fight, flight, or freeze, fawning is subtler. It looks like compliance, but it's actually a desperate attempt to stay safe by making yourself non-threatening. In other words, you try to control others' reactions by abandoning yourself. You give up your needs so they'll feel better. You dim your light so they won't feel insecure. You disappear piece by piece and then wonder why no one truly sees you. The truth is, Many people pleasers aren't nice at all in the traditional sense. They're anxious, hypervigilant, emotionally overextended, not because they love people more, but because they fear being disliked more. There's a difference between kindness and compulsion. Kindness is a choice. Compulsion is a cage. One comes from self-worth, the other from fear. This distortion is often reinforced by culture, especially for women. You're praised for being sweet, selfless, nurturing. You're taught to avoid confrontation, to keep the peace, to be agreeable. Assertiveness is often labeled as aggressive. Boundaries are mistaken for coldness. So you learn to soften your voice, to over-explain your no, to smile when you're seething. You internalize the message that your comfort should never come at the cost of someone else's convenience, that if someone's disappointed, it must be your fault. So you adapt. You become the emotional airbag in every relationship, absorbing conflict, cushioning egos, sacrificing your truth for someone else's comfort. And it works, for a while. People like you. You're seen as easygoing, empathetic, reliable, but the cost is that your life becomes one long apology. You apologize for existing, for taking up space, for having needs, for not being what someone else expected you to be. You say sorry when someone bumps into you. You feel guilty for resting. You feel anxious when you're not being productive, because your worth has been tied to your usefulness for so long. Eventually, the body starts to protest. People pleasers often carry their pain in physical form. Tension in the jaw, knots in the stomach, chronic fatigue. Your nervous system is in a constant state of low-level alert. You can't relax because you're always bracing for rejection. Even when no one's around, the performance doesn't end. You rehearse conversations in your head. You ruminate over how you were perceived. You replay every no you've ever said, wondering if you hurt someone. The mind becomes a prison. And then there's the quiet grief, the mourning of the self that was never allowed to be. You start to wonder who you'd be if you weren't always managing everyone else's perception of you. If you could speak your truth without fear, if you could say no without guilt, if you could disappoint someone and still believe you're worthy of love. But those thoughts feel dangerous because they threaten the foundation your identity was built on. If you're not the nice one, who are you? This is where the inner conflict becomes unbearable, because deep down, you know something is wrong. You know the smile is fake. You know the resentment is building. You know that being too nice is slowly killing you inside. But changing feels terrifying, because it means risking the very things you built your life around: approval, belonging, control. So you keep going, you keep pleasing, you keep betraying yourself in small daily ways, hoping someone will notice, will rescue you, will finally give you the love you've been trying to earn. But they don't, because you've trained them not to. You've taught them that you're always available, that your needs come last, that your silence means consent, that your yes always means yes, even when it's a scream for help in disguise. And so they don't change, because why would they? You've made it so easy to take you for granted. And here's the darkest part of it all. The longer you play this role, the more invisible you become, not just to others, but to yourself. You forget how to identify your own desires. You forget how to recognize your own pain. You forget what it feels like to live for yourself. You become a ghost, haunting your own life, trapped between who you are and who you've pretended to be. And yet, the door was never locked. The cage was always open. But leaving requires something that people pleasers were never taught: how to disappoint someone and survive it. That's the question most people pleasers never learned how to answer, because somewhere along the way, they were taught that causing discomfort, any discomfort, meant they were bad. That making someone upset, letting someone down, saying no, drawing a line, asserting a need, or even expressing anger was the same as being selfish or cruel, so they avoided it at all costs. They became experts at preserving everyone else's comfort while living in quiet torment themselves. But disappointment is not destruction. Disapproval is not death. That's the lie the nervous system holds on to. When a people pleaser begins to set boundaries, the body often reacts as if it's in danger. Racing heart, tight chest, sweating palms. Because to the subconscious mind, rejection feels like abandonment, and abandonment feels like annihilation. So the fear isn't irrational, it's primal. It goes back to the child who needed connection to survive and learned that authenticity came at the cost of love. This is why healing people-pleasing is not just about saying no more often. It's about reprogramming the nervous system to feel safe in discomfort. It's about teaching the body that boundaries don't equal betrayal, that you can assert yourself and still be loved. That being disliked doesn't make you unworthy. It's about learning to tolerate the ache of disapproval without collapsing. Because the truth is, when you stop abandoning yourself, you will inevitably disappoint others. And that's okay. That's necessary. The psychological root of people-pleasing lies in the fracture between self and approval. When your identity is built on being liked, any sign of conflict feels like identity death. So you adapt. You become a mirror, reflecting back whatever others want to see. But mirrors are not seen. They're looked into. That's the tragedy. The more you contort to fit others, the more invisible you become, not just to them, but to yourself. And the world does not reward invisibility. The world takes advantage of it. The more agreeable you are, the more is expected of you. The more silent you are, the more your silence is used against you. Eventually, people don't just assume you'll say yes, they rely on it. And when you finally say no, they act betrayed. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you stopped playing the role they cast you in. The punishment for pleasing too much is that you become replaceable, forgettable, disrespected. You taught them you don't need much, so they give you less. Over time, this dynamic hardens into a deep inner belief. I must earn love by suffering quietly. You start to see yourself only in relation to others. Your emotions become secondary. Your needs become shameful. You're the one everyone leans on, but no one asks how you're doing. You're the reliable one, but no one checks if you're drowning. And you wonder, what would happen if I stopped? If I let someone else take care of me for once? But the thought feels foreign, dangerous. You don't know how to receive without guilt. You don't know how to be loved without performing. This creates a devastating paradox. You crave closeness, but fear that being real will scare people away. So you wear the mask. You play the part. But because you're never fully seen, you never feel fully loved. Even when people praise you, it doesn't sink in, because deep down, you know they're loving the version of you that serves them, not the real you. The real you is hidden under layers of accommodation, niceness, and unspoken pain. So you keep performing, hoping someone will finally see through it, but no one ever does, because you made it look effortless. Emotionally, this leads to burnout, but not just physical exhaustion. It's spiritual depletion, a sense of being used up, like you're living everyone else's life but your own. You start to fantasize about disappearing, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, invisible way, just slipping away. No more demands, no more expectations, just silence, just space to finally breathe. But you don't leave. You keep showing up. Because guilt is the leash that keeps you tethered. Guilt for not doing enough. Guilt for setting boundaries. Guilt for even thinking about yourself. Guilt becomes your default setting. You feel guilty for resting, guilty for declining, guilty for wanting more. So you stay, you endure, you shrink. And yet, under that guilt is grief. Grief for the years you lost being what others needed instead of who you were. Grief for the friendships that were one-sided. Grief for the relationships that consumed you. Grief for the love you gave that was never returned. Grief for the voice you silenced, the dreams you postponed, the self you abandoned. That grief is heavy, and it doesn't go away until it's honored. Healing begins when you finally decide to choose yourself, not in a selfish way, but in a reclaiming way. You realize that kindness without boundaries is manipulation. That saying yes when you want to say no is dishonest. that pretending to be okay when you're not is betrayal, not just of yourself, but of everyone who loves you for real. Because real love doesn't require performance. It doesn't demand perfection. It doesn't punish authenticity. To choose yourself is not to become cold or selfish. It is to stop bleeding for those who wouldn't even give you a bandage. It is to stop explaining your worth, to stop overgiving in the hope of being kept. It is to understand that being liked is not the same as being loved, and being useful is not the same as being valued. You start to realize if they only like you when you're quiet, agreeable, and available, then they don't really like you. One of the hardest parts of this transformation is that people will resist it. They've grown accustomed to the version of you that gives without asking, that listens without speaking, that bends without breaking. When you stop doing those things, some will guilt you, some will leave, some will call you selfish. Let them. That is not proof you were doing something wrong. It is proof you were doing something different. And different is often mistaken for wrong when people are used to your self-abandonment. But the right people won't be threatened by your boundaries. They'll respect them. The right people won't need you to shrink so they can feel safe. They'll meet you at your full height. The right people won't punish you for saying no. They'll ask what your yes means. And the right people won't make you earn love. They'll offer it freely, just like you used to. But this time, you'll know the difference between giving and sacrificing. Internally, you begin to rebuild your sense of self. You start small. You say no to things you used to tolerate. You pause before agreeing. You check in with your body. Does this feel aligned? You start journaling your true feelings, even if you don't say them out loud yet. You notice where you betray yourself and forgive yourself each time. You stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault. You start grieving the parts of you that only existed to be acceptable. And slowly, you begin to feel real again. Real. It's awkward at first. You may feel like you're being rude. You may worry people think you've changed.